Welcome back to the deadly and dangerous alligator pit. Major salute to the ladies and gentlemen. You know, I've said this before and I'm going to say it again. Intense infighting, severe civil wars led to the downfall of the melanated nobility and aristocrats of Europa and the Americas. Infighting, civil wars, not being able to come to an agreement led to the collapse and the downfall of a once great, powerful empire of the Western world. All right. So that's what we're going to continue in this video. And we're going to look a little deeper into the hidden hand concept and the use of the cat's paw. So real brief, the cat's paw is basically an old folklore or an old myth where it deals with a monkey and a cat. And the monkey saw some food that it wanted to eat, but the food was in a very, very risky place. All right. It was on top of a hot stove. And on top of that, the owner of the monkey and the cat was coming in and out of the kitchen. So the monkey didn't want to get caught stealing the food. So what the monkey did is he played upon the naive, gullible nature of the cat. He played on the good, kind heart of the cat. So, you have that quote, taking people's kindness for weakness. The monkey took the cat's kindness for a weakness. And what the monkey did is he convinced the cat to allow the monkey to use the cat's paw to scrape off the fruit on top of the stove. And once the fruit was recovered, the monkey took the fruit and stuffed it in his mouth while the cat was stuck there with a burned up hand. And the owner caught the cat stealing food out of the kitchen. All right. So that is a strategy called the cat's paw, rather, dealing with the monkey and the cat. And this is actually the same type of strategy used by people in power who want to stay behind closed doors, who want to keep their identity private, because for whatever reason, when people know who they are publicly, maybe it makes it harder for them to rule. Maybe it creates too much confrontation and competition. So it's much easier for you to play the puppet master and to put a vassal king out in the front and let the people think that that person is actually running the show when really you are the one running the show behind closed doors. All right. So that is the premise and the preface for this video, to understand that even though here in 2025, we see people publicly on TV and certain names that have been put in circulation, and we think that these may be the people who rule the world. And although these people may play a senior position, they may have a certain degree of authority. But I'm here to tell you that based on my hypothesis and just my own prior research and my own deep thinking, it's pretty hard for me to believe that the melanated people of Europa lost all their power. They lost all their prestige. And that today the world is being run completely by Caucasian, people of an ethnic Caucasian background, whether they be so-called Jewish or WASP, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant Christian, or even some of your nations over in Asia. All right. You see these pale people running the world today. But what if I told you that behind closed doors, they have melanated puppet masters with their hands in their back, controlling them no different than a toy, controlling them no different than the monkey controlled the cat. All right. So in this video, I want to provide a little bit more, background information to help you understand why I've come to that conclusion myself. And I'm not the only one. I got to give credit to people who put this thought out there, before me, that are older than me and that have been researching before I had. But, I heard brothers like Bobby Hemmett say this. I heard brothers like Brother Panic say this. I heard brothers like I see the Duke of Tears say this. And a few other people that, have put out great information. All right. So maybe this is something that we want to, take and run with and actually consider, because, most of us that have grown up in Western civilization for the last 100 years, we all have been subject to extreme brainwashing and extreme mind control programming, including myself. So this whole idea about our people being from so-called Africa, but we can't name one African country or tribe, and millions of us being brought across the, rocky Atlantic Ocean And all the melanated people of North America coming from, they have African descent. We know that that was a lot of brainwashing. But what if I also told you that the people that established the 13 colonies and who they told us did it was also brainwashing? And when they also told us that the people of Europe, you know, some of these kings and queens and nobility that may have been melanated, that they have completely lost their power. All right, that also could have been mind control brainwashing. So we have to be very humble. We have to be patient with ourselves and others and really do our own dig deep and do our own research, because history is a very, very complex phenomenon. And a lot of the time periods that we're trying to learn and figure out about have been long gone and long past. And we don't have many direct resources. All right. A lot of that history has been destroyed. It's been altered, edited. So we don't have a lot of the primary resources to see into exactly what happened. Most importantly, because we were not there. All right. So if you didn't witness something firsthand or directly, then you have secondhand information. OK, so we really don't know what happened in medieval Europe because we weren't there. So my hypothesis and others that the melanated people of Europa did not lose their power and they're ruling behind closed doors. This is not a far-fetched theory to me. OK, and I also want you to think this. A lot of us, have done research and we find out that the original people of Greece or Rome or the Etruscans, people of Southern Europe, the Mediterranean, that a lot of them originally were melanated, Shemitic, and Hamitic people. And although they may have become amalgamated over time, but this is how they started out. We also know that is the same case for North Africa, the Levant, Europa, and America as well. So how is it that the melanated people are the oldest ethnic group of people on the planet or the earth? They're the oldest people. They started civilization. They initiated civilization. But, just through a course of a couple of hundred years, they just lost all their power after all those thousands of years of ruling. I can remember one time I was at the courthouse in Stewart County, Georgia, in my mother's hometown. And we were in the courthouse getting some records on our family land. And in the courthouse, they had a poster talking about the American Indian history of Southwest Georgia. And they clearly have on the poster that the Mississippian Indians of Southwest Georgia had been ruling and living in that territory for over 1,000 years. So how is it that our people have been ruling over 1,000 years in the Americas and in Europa? All right. So some of these dynasties in Europe, like the Habsburg dynasty, the Stuart dynasty, the dynasties of the Holy Roman Empire, they were ruling for hundreds of years. When you think about the Canaanites, the Hamitic bloodline, they ruled their empire for over 1,000 years or several hundred years. When you think about the ancient Egyptians. So these people had very, very, very long, periods of rulership. And in a couple hundred years, you had these people coming out of the caves who had no civilization, who had no culture, and they just toppled all societies and all empires that surrounded them to the east and the west, and they just ruled the whole world, and they're ruling today. And that's how we got in the modern era. All right, that is also mind control programming. That is also propaganda, and that is brainwashing. It doesn't make sense. Okay, it doesn't make sense. So this is just more about us using our own mind, thinking, and evaluating what makes sense. Not necessarily what has been told to us, not what has been forced upon us as what the truth is, and what the narrative will be, but what actually makes sense to us when we objectively evaluate these situations. So what I'm going to do is we're going to talk about two phenomenon, and then I'm going to read a little bit in a book I have called The Negro Question, Part 7, Swarthy Memoirs of a Black American Revolution, 1775 to 1783. All right. That's the resource that I'm reading from. And a lot of this other information is coming from off the top of my mind. All right. So I want you to think on today how when you have two people, no matter what their ethnicity is, but like right now, let's stick to so-called Black Americans. You have two so-called Black Americans. And whenever we have a conflict with each other, we tend to not be able to solve it with just both parties. All right. So right now, for example, I saw the brother Damon Dash one of the hip hop moguls, going against, another hip hop mogul named Cameron. All right, two melanated American men. And it looks like there may have been some type of a misunderstanding. So Damon Dash is now going to sue Cameron. But what he's doing is he's going to get a third party, which is known as an attorney or a lawyer. And they're going to initiate certain action. So Cameron and Damon Dash, they're not solving the problem with just them two. They have to go and get a third party to help them solve the problem, right? Or also think about how when two people have an issue in society and they can't get along and they can't come to a conclusion like civilized humans. So what they do is they pick their phone up and they call 911 and they call this third objective party to come in to take over the situation. All right. Think about the court system. When you have a man and a woman who were married, right? And let's say that the marriage didn't really, go the way they planned. So they got to get a divorce. Now you have this third party called the state government coming in, and they really are about to dictate and control, in addition to the attorneys, they are about to control what actually happens with the marriage. So in these situations where you have two people having a conflict, but they can't come to a resolution, so they have to hire or bring in this mercenary or bring in a foreigner or bring in somebody outside of their territory or outside of their jurisdiction to help them solve their internal problem. Okay. This is one of the things that happened in not only Europa, but also in the Americas. You would have two chiefs. You would have Olata Utina and Saturiwa, and they have these conflicts. All right. And they can't come to any kind of solution on, how they want to distribute the land or whatever it is that they beefing about. Right. So now you have Olata Utina teaming up with the French. And then you have Saturia teaming up with the Spanish to go against each other. So you have these foreign mercenaries or these outsiders being brought in to help with the conflict, right? And this is the same thing that they would do in medieval Europa. So you would have two melanated or swarthy kings or queens, let's say, and they beefing with each other. They could be beefing over the right to the throne. They could be beefing over land or resources, right? In a prior example, I talked about the 100 Years' War, which was a conflict between England and France, where they were beefing about certain land and beefing about controlling the throne of France, and how this conflict went on for decades and decades and decades, which is why it's called the 100 Years' War. So you have these issues between these aristocrats or these nobles, and they bring in these outsiders to help with the problem. Now, the original outsider or foreigner or mercenary that was brought in to help with the problem is known as the Wild Man of Europa. All right, the Wild Man of Europa. And that is actually who you see here on the screen. So this image in front of you is a tapestry in a German museum, which was created around the 1300s or 1400s Common Era. And what you see here is you see it's called the Wild Man and Moors. All right. So to our left right here on the screen, you have a group of wild Caucasian men who are uncivilized, hairy, who have no culture, roaming the forest, right? No shoes, and they have weapons in their hand, and they look very, very aggressive, and they look very hungry, and they look very mad. And what do you see them doing? They are deep, all right, and they're in a group. They got their weapons, and they are mobbing a castle. And who lives inside of this castle? We see the melanated or swarthy aristocrats and nobles of Europa who ruled and were living in these castles in the 13, 14, 15, 1600s and going on back to the 800s and 900s Common Era or AD. All right. So you have these swarthy Europans living in the castles, all right, who were the real kings and queens, the upper and middle class of Europa. They're living in the castles. But you have these wild men coming to attack them. All right. Now, what I'm going to tell you is this. During this time period, from some historical record, it appears that these wild men or wild Caucasians, I'll say, started to infiltrate their way into Europa, maybe somewhere between the 400s, 500s, 600s AD, because it is said in literature that Attila the Hun and other Afro-Asiatic swarthy warriors pushed them westward into Europa. All right. So the Caucasian actually didn't have his origins in Europa. All right, he was pushed into Europa by some of these Afro-Asiatic warriors. Okay, and when they came into Europa, they started to have issues and collide with not only the Byzantine Empire of Eastern Europa, but also the Holy Roman Empire of Western Europa. All right, and those different, kingdoms, dukedoms, these different principalities where these melanated people ruled. You had a lot of these Caucasian people come in these civilizations, and there were a lot of conflicts. But what eventually happened is that a lot of the Caucasian people settled in these areas. They came to some agreement, or at least their leadership came to an agreement with the Swarthy leadership. They would live on certain plots of land, and they were allowed to stay there. And what would happen is this. So you see these Caucasian people coming to us to attack these melanated people in the castle, but you had Caucasian bands who were just, wild people who were hungry, and they were looking to get resources for their family. So they were coming in on their own to destroy these castles. But also you had other swarthy aristocratic families who would clean up these Caucasians. All right. So a lot of the Caucasian males, they would take them, they would shave them down, they would clean them up, they would bathe them, they would teach them basic language, and they would civilize these people, and they would place weapons in their hands. And then these same cleaned up Caucasians would be paired up with other swarthy knights and other swarthy warriors that may have been, fighting for the king or had some allegiance to that house or the king, right? And they would go and fight that king's cousin to try to get some land. And after they would take the land or kill the king's cousin, it would be given over to the swarthy aristocratic family that sent them. And sometimes they would make a knight out of the Caucasian males who completed the mission and who accomplished what they wanted them to accomplish. So that is some of the origins of, I think, where you get what's known as freed and accepted knights. Now, today we may call it freed and accepted masonry, or a freed and accepted mason, or a Freemason. But the original concept came from these Caucasian wild men who were freed because a lot of them had been enslaved, and a lot of them were under the feudal system. All right. A lot of them were Slavics. A lot of them were serfs. So that's what a Slavic or a serf is. It is somebody who was working under the feudal system, and they were having to pay rent or provide labor to their landlord, and their landlords were these swarthy aristocrats of Europa who actually owned the land. Remember, when the Caucasian came into Europa, there were already people there. All right. So some of these Caucasian fighters, when they would be successful, okay, you would have certain, aristocratic families sponsor and finance and fund them. And they would make some of them knights. All right. They would knight them. And this is how you get some Caucasian men, getting access to prominence, money, status, and resources during medieval Europa. All right. Not all of them. I actually think majority of them were still serfs, Vandals, wild men, Slavics, and they were still under the feudal system. But you had a minority percentage of them who were started to be knighted and raised up through the freed and accepted knight or Masonic system. And this allowed them to now start to, have a little bit of status and a claim for themselves. All right. So a lot of these Caucasian families today that have, power, prestige, resources, have access to banking, they may have an ancestor that was, part of one of these freed and accepted knighted families. All right. And of course, you also had people that were married into the swarthy aristocratic or noble families as well. So, yes, the melanated people of Europa did have a practice of marrying some of these Caucasian people after they would clean them up. All right. For whatever reason. So that's how the men got a lot of their starts. Now, as far as with the Caucasian females, because you had not only the wild man, but you had the wild woman as well. What they would do with the females is they would clean her up as well, shampoo her hair, shave her down, and they would place her in the bathhouses. OK, so they would have her in the bathhouses, and a lot of the melanated women would civilize them. All right. Teach them language, teach them culture, teach them some of the secrets of motherhood. All right. So you had these Caucasian women put in the harems, and they would start to be trafficked, traded, distributed throughout Northwest Africa, Europa, and the Levant. All right. So when you think about the harem system, all right, when you think about the slave trade of the Ottoman Empire, the Osman Empire, a lot of the Caucasian women were actually used as currency. Okay, so they actually were a form of living currency, living money. And a lot of the men back then would trade them, you know. Is that cool? Absolutely not. But this is something that took place. So you had a lot of Caucasian women through the haremage system will be cleaned up and civilized, and a lot of them will be married off to either a prince, a duke, a knight, and in some cases maybe a king. An example of this would be the movie called The Long Ships with Sidney Poitier. It's a movie called The Long Ships with Sidney Poitier. And in this movie, which takes place, I want to say, in either the 12 or the 1300s Common Era, Sidney Poitier plays the role of a melanated swarthy or Moorish king, and he has a Circassian wife, a Caucasian wife, and it clearly shows him ruling the empire, but his wife is Caucasian, okay? And during the movie, it also shows a lot of the wild men who were cleaned up, and they were put under the galleys of the ships, and they were forced into slavery and perpetual bondage of the melanated swarthy king. All right. And by the end of the movie, of course, the Caucasian woman helped out a lot of the Caucasian wild men that had been enslaved. OK, but that's how the Caucasian woman came up. So what I'm going into is that how did you get some of these initial Caucasian families? How did they get access to resources? And what I'm here to tell you is that it was the swarthy aristocrats and nobles of Europa that financed, funded, civilized, and helped them. Remember, they were the wild men of the forest. They had no civilization. Okay. So how did they go from being wild men of the forest to now being bankers and merchants and things of that nature? And the reason why is because you had swarthy aristocrats helping them. All right. So right here, you clearly have the swarthy king who's in the middle of the screen, and you have the swarthy king's wife, and they both are dark-skinned people, and they have blonde hair. Now that's going to be very important, because most of us, when we think about blue eyes and blonde hair, we're very, very quick to attribute that to a Caucasian person because of our brainwashing. But we're going to see in a minute that you had melanated people who had blue eyes. All right. You had melanated people who had blue eyes. So this is an example of it right here. All right. So you had this melanated family, and they could have been fighting against one of their swarthy cousins of the Holy Roman Empire. And instead of them just sending all melanated knights to fight, they're going to send a few Caucasian ones too. So this was just a practice that they had, and something that they would do. Okay. So the next thing that I want to do now is we're going to switch gears, and we're going to bring our attention to some information that can be easily found, all right, on Google. So you don't even have to really dig that deep to find it. But we're going to get ready to go into, where did the Rothschild family get their start from? Okay. So, you know, in the modern world, when we think about some of these so-called ruling families that rule the world, you'll get names like Rockefeller. You may get names like Goldman, but also you may hear the name Rothschild or Red Shield. So who are the Rothschilds, and where did these people get their start from? Do the Rothschilds descend from a Caucasian wild man or wild woman family? Were the Rothschilds originally melanated people, but maybe they started to amalgamate themselves? Who are these people, and where did they get their start from? Did they get their wealth out of thin air? Or were there swarthy families of Europa that actually helped them? And the swarthy families that helped them are playing the role as the hidden hand. They're playing the cat's paw game by using the Rothschilds and some of these other public figures that we know of as the cat, while they actually are the monkey behind closed doors, getting all of the resources. All right. But they just can't be seen. So let's read some basic information on the Rothschild family and where they got their start from. OK. The connection between Hesse-Kassel and the Rothschild family is through Meyer Amschel Rothschild, who became a court factor for the wealthy Landgrave of Hesse-Kassel, Wilhelm IX. Let me reread that. The connection between Hesse-Kassel and the Rothschild family is through Meyer Amschel Rothschild, who became a court factor for the wealthy Landgrave of Hesse-Kassel, Wilhelm IX. Rothschild managed the Landgrave's finances, helping to build the Rothschild family's fortune, particularly by handling Wilhelm IX's wealth during the Napoleonic Wars. This relationship was pivotal in establishing the Rothschild dynasty's international banking empire. Let me reread this. The connection between Hesse-Kassel and the Rothschild family is through Meyer Amschel Rothschild, who became a court factor for the wealthy Landgrave of Hesse-Kassel, Wilhelm IX. Rothschild managed the Landgrave's finances, helping to build the Rothschild family's fortune, particularly by handling Wilhelm IX's wealth during the Napoleonic Wars. This relationship was pivotal in establishing the Rothschild banking empire. All right. So it says that the founder of the Rothschild banking family began his career in Frankfurt as a court factor for the Landgrave of Hesse-Kassel. So the first thing that you want to remember and point out is that Rothschild got his start from the wealthy Landgrave of Hesse-Kassel, all right, which was one of the aristocratic noble families of the Holy Roman Empire in modern day what we call Germany or that area. Of course, it was a little larger back then, but this is where Meyer Amschel Rothschild got his start, all right. He was an accountant or a banker, okay. So keep in mind that Rothschild and some of these other families served a role as accountants, financiers, and bankers for these Holy Roman Empire families who actually controlled the real wealth. All right. So it goes on to say that this relationship was pivotal in establishing the Rothschild dynasty's international banking empire. So off the top, we already see right here that the Rothschilds got their help and their start from the wealthy Landgrave of Hesse-Kassel, this family that was in Germany or Eastern Europe. All right. Now, in a minute, we're going to see that the House of Hesse-Kassel is tied into one of the Germanic Holy Roman Empire families. All right. Now, that's important because in a minute, we're going to see what their ethnicity was. OK, so remember, keep in mind, we're talking about the cat's paw. We're talking about some of these swarthy aristocratic families hiding behind closed doors because of all these perpetual conflicts and wars. So they're now going to use a strategy of the cat's paw by using some of these foreigners as mercenaries to do their public work. So their faces aren't seen, to do their public accounting, to do their public financing. All right. It move on. It says William I or Wilhelm IX, Elector of Hesse, the ruler of Hesse-Kassel, hired Meyer Amschel Rothschild to manage his vast fortune, which was derived from providing Hessian mercenaries to the British for the American Revolutionary War. All right. So it says that the House of Hesse-Kassel or the ruler of Hesse-Kassel, Wilhelm IX, all right, hired Meyer Amschel Rothschild to help manage his vast fortune. And it also says that Wilhelm of Hesse-Kassel derived a lot of his wealth from providing Hessian mercenaries to the British for the American Revolutionary War. All right. So we already know that the Georgian line that was ruling in England during the time of the American Revolutionary War, that they had blood ties and family ties to the Holy Roman Empire of Germany. OK, and some of these various families of Germany that they had ties to would send resources and help during the American Revolutionary War. All right. And one of these prominent families was the family known as Hesse-Kassel. All right. The Rothschild dynasty. Meyer Amschel's relationship with Wilhelm IX provided a strong financial foundation for his sons to establish international banking houses across Europe, leading to the Rothschild family's immense wealth and influence. All right. So the Rothschild dynasty's start of, international banking across Europe, the strong financial foundation to invest in that came from his business dealings with the Hesse and Kassel family, all right, of the Holy Roman Empire. All right. So once again, we're dealing with the hidden hand. Where did the Rothschilds get their wealth and power and control from? Because the way that they're marketed today and the way that they're talked about today, it seems as if they are the end all be all. Like they call all the shots, like all the money is due to them, and that all the kings, prime ministers, presidents, and leaders of the world are indebted to them. All right. Could it be that the Rothschilds are still a face for the House of Hessen-Kassel even to this day? So yes, during the late 1700s, the House of Hessen-Kassel was behind the Rothschild family. But why would they not be behind them today? Okay. So Meyer Amschel Rothschild played the role as a court agent, or as I say, an accountant, and supervised the Landgrave's estate, tax collection, and financial transactions. So they played the role as the accountant, or the financier, excuse me. All right. So the House of Hessen-Kassel, which were these swarthy, melanated Europans, had public business dealings, and they used an intermediate or an agent, a court agent or a court accountant by the name of Meyer Amschel Rothschild. And Mr. Rothschild supervised in the Landgrave's estate, supervised in tax collection for the Amschel for the House of Hessen-Kassel, and they also supervised or oversaw the financial transactions on behalf of the family. So they played the role as the accountant. The House of Hessen-Kassel gave power of attorney to Rothschild to do business on their behalf. So I'm pretty sure in the public it would seem as if Rothschild is calling all the shots. But after the business dealings are done, Rothschild is going to answer to the House of Hessen-Kassel behind closed doors. All right. So let's keep going. The investments and profits made from managing Wilhelm's assets, along with Rothschild's subsequent international banking ventures, were crucial to the family's ascent in European finance. So we have already right here that the origin of all Rothschild wealth came from the House of Hessen-Kassel, from the accounting and banking services provided, and the profits made from that were used to invest in the international banking ventures when Meyer Amschel Rothschild sent his 5 sons throughout Europe to start central banks. Okay, so your central banking system of Rothschild had its origins in the House of Hessen-Kassel, and this is where a lot of the monies and the finances were accrued. All right. Also keep in mind, part of the mind control programming and part of the brainwashing is if you look up pictures of Wilhelm I, the Elector of Hesse, if you look up pictures of Rothschild, they're going to give us these fake images of these Caucasian people. But I think these are fake images. These aren't the real people, because during the 1700s, the 1600s, the 1500s, the swarthy people of Europa were still ruling, and they were all over the place. And in a minute, we're going to read Benjamin Franklin, where he bears witness to this. Now, Benjamin Franklin was actually a Caucasian man. All right. So I'm not one of these people that's going to just say that everybody of the medieval world and ancient world were all melanated. All right. Some of them were amalgamated, meaning that they were mixed or mulatto. All right. But the majority of them were. And you had a small minority percentage of people of prominence that were Caucasian. And one of these people is Benjamin Franklin. OK. So let's move on. Let's end right here. The wealth and capital generated from the Hesse-Kassel connection allowed Meyer Amschel's 5 sons to establish major Rothschild banking branches in London, Paris, Vienna, and Naples, creating the first true international banking dynasty. So the first true international banking dynasty, the resources used to establish it came from the wealth and capital generated from the Hessen-Kassel connection with Meyer Amschel Rothschild, excuse me. All right. Very, very important. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go to my book called The Negro Question, Part 7 by Mr. Lee Cummings, Swarthy Memoirs of a Black American Revolution, 1775 to 1783. So keep in mind that, remember, the American Revolution, the French Revolution, The connection between Hesse-Kassel and the Rothschild, all this is during the late 1700s, 1770s, 1780s, 1790s, early 1800s, right? During the period of these revolutions. During the 1700s, the nobles and aristocrats of Europa were still swarthy. All right. And we're going to find that out right now. So let's start on page 24 and let's read. So we're going to read. Sometimes you may hear me say so-called black, or you may hear me say swarthy. But when I say the black nobility or the swarthy nobility, I'm talking about the same people. All right. The black government of England and the American Revolution. Britain in the Hanoverian Age, 1714 to 1837, and Encyclopedia, pages 287 to 290. So that's the resource, all right? The Britain in the Hanoverian Age, 1714 to 1837, and Encyclopedia, pages 287 to 290. On pages 287 to 290, King George II court is described as Teutonic. The word Teutonic was a word that described all the Germanic tribes. And based on the writings of Benjamin Franklin, a picture begins to emerge. The King's Parliament was full of swarthy people, or so-called black people. All right. Mr. Professor Boyd Dawkins, another resource. All right. Professor Boyd Dawkins, and in his work called Our Earliest Ancestors, page 95, let's see what he wrote. He writes, quote, "Or suppose we go back a few years and examine the history of Germany. The cry under which the Germans have advanced to victory is the cry of a united Germany, that Germany should unite under one rule of the Teutonic people." End quote. The professor is referring to the Black Holy Roman German Empire. So when you hear me use that term, the Holy Roman Empire, or you may hear me say the Teutonic Knights, or you may hear me say the Germanic Knights, I'm talking about these swarthy people that were ruling in Eastern Europe. All right. Let's move on. What color were the Germans in 1751? Let's rely on the eyewitness testimony of Benjamin Franklin. All right. Now, in Benjamin Franklin's essay, America as a Land of Opportunity, that he wrote in 1751, Benjamin Franklin wrote that, quote, "Germany is black/swarthy." So Mr. Benjamin Franklin, the gentleman on the $100 bill, in 1751, he stated that Germany is ruled and possessed by so-called swarthy or black people. All right. The colonial revolution started 25 years from the date of Benjamin Franklin's essay. Hardly enough time for the German people to go from being black to Caucasian. This book will provide that the black German/British army occupied the 13 colonies. All right. Benjamin Franklin. Let's continue to read. Remember, Benjamin Franklin wrote in 1751 an essay called America as a Land of Opportunity. This is what he wrote, quote, "And since detachments of English from Britain sent to America will have their places at home so soon supplied and increased so largely here, why should the Palatine Moors or Germans be suffered to swarm into our settlements, and by herding together establish their language and manners to the exclusion of ours? Why should Pennsylvania, founded by the English, become a colony of aliens who will shortly be so numerous as to Germanicize us instead of our anglifying them, and will never adopt our language or customs any more than they can acquire our complexion?" So let's reread what this says. Mr. Benjamin Franklin states that, "And since our detachments of English from Britain sent to America, that these Germans were starting to swarm our settlements, and they're herding together to establish their language and manners to the exclusion of ours. Why should Pennsylvania, which was founded by the English, become a colony of aliens who will shortly be so numerous as to Germanicize us, and will never adopt our language or customs any more than they can adopt or acquire our complexion?" So Mr. Benjamin Franklin is stating that the Germans, or the swarthy people of Eastern Europe, were starting to come on the 13 colonies, and he had a problem with it because at this time the only Caucasian people were known as white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, or known as English, and they were living on the 13 colonies. But they were living on the 13 colonies with the swarthy people of Ireland, Scotland, and the original English, the original Angles and Saxons who were swarthy. So Benjamin Franklin's complaining like, look, man, all these black people from Europe, all these different countries, the swarthy French, the swarthy Swedish, the swarthy Germans, the swarthy English, like they overtaking us on this colony, basically. All right. Y'all pause right here. Hold on. All right, sorry about that. I'm back. But what we have is Mr. Benjamin Franklin complaining about, that these people from Germany, they don't speak our language and they can't acquire our complexion. So think about it. So if Benjamin Franklin is Caucasian and he's speaking on behalf of the other white Anglo-Saxon Protestants that are on the 13 colonies, he's complaining that these incoming Germans, they can't take on our language. They don't want our customs, and they're not going to take on our complexion either. So if Mr. Benjamin Franklin is a Caucasian man of a pale or a lighter skin complexion, that means that these people from Germany that are coming in, they are of a swarthy complexion. They are of a dark skin complexion. All right. Let's continue. When Benjamin Franklin arrived in the 13 colonies in 1723, there was already a black Scottish, Irish, Dutch, Swede, German, and Welsh population present in great numbers. These blacks were the seed of the original colonists who had come to North America in the days of King James VI of Scotland, King Charles I, King Charles II, and King James II, or the Duke of New York, or Duke of York. The data associated with the colonization of North America by these black Scots and black Brits can be found in the Negro Question Part 6, the Black Colonies. This was the reason that Benjamin Franklin sounded the alarm in his essay. The original colonists were black or swarthy. The American Indians were black or swarthy. And here comes another 70,000 black or swarthy Germans, Scottish, Irish, or Europeans pouring into Pennsylvania. All right. So we wanted to establish that on the 13 colonies, when Ben Franklin arrived, that there were already melanated Scots, melanated Irish, melanated Dutch, melanated Swedes, melanated Germans, and melanated Welsh already living in great numbers. All right. So the 13 colonies was already populated by melanated people of Europa and America when Benjamin Franklin arrived. And they had been there because they were the seed of the original colonists who had come to North America in the days of King James VI of Scotland, King Charles I, King Charles II, and King James II, the Duke of York. The data associated with the colonization of North America by these black Scots and black British can be found in some of other Mr. Lee Cummings' work. And he concludes by saying that the original colonists were swarthy, the American Indians were swarthy, and here comes another 70,000 swarthy Europeans, German, Irish, and Scottish, pouring into Pennsylvania. So what Benjamin Franklin was saying is that we surrounded by all these swarthy people. You know what I'm saying? The American Indian is so-called black or swarthy. And all these countries of Europa, they're swarthy and they're coming over here. So there aren't that many Caucasian people here. And another mind control programming deception is that the so-called black American is only 13 or 14% of the population of the United States of America. That is not true. We had the largest numbers during the 13 colonies all the way till today. Just yesterday, when I was talking to a family member, She was stating how Donald Trump was talking about his mother being from, I think, Scotland. And I think Donald Trump's father is either from Germany or one of them other Eastern European countries. But Donald Trump is the president of the United States, and his mother was born in another country. And Donald Trump is much older than I am. Donald Trump may be in his late 70s, early 30s. I mean, late 70s, early 80s. Okay, I'm in my mid 30s. So how is it that I'm in my mid 30s, but my mom and dad was born in America on both sides of the family? My grandparents on both sides of the family were born in America. My great-grandparents were born in America on both sides of the family, going all the way back. So I can go multiple generations back where all of my ancestors was born right here in America. I have a family cemetery in Southwest Georgia to show that I have ancestors going back to the 1800s that were born right here in America. So how is it that I'm more than half of Donald Trump's age, younger, but I have multiple ancestors that were born in the Americas, and Donald Trump is in his late 70s, early 80s, and his parents were born in Europe? Because that goes to show that a lot of these Caucasian people, their parents don't go back to the 13 colonies. Their ancestry doesn't go back to the 13 colonies. Their people really just got over here in like the 1800s, maybe late 1700s. They haven't been over here that long. And with some of them, they got here just in the early 1900s, late 1800s. All right. So that's why I say that the so-called Black American is really your true original American, because we're the ones that have American Indian ancestry. And some of us have the swarthy ancestry of the people on the 13 colonies. The 13 colonies was established back in the 1600s. Donald Trump's bloodline does not go back that far. Believe it or not, most Caucasian people's bloodline doesn't go back that far, because a lot of their ancestors came over in the late 1700s, 1800s, and early 1900s. They were not here during the 13 colonies. All right. It was a minority percentage of them. So now we want to look at the gentleman that's on the screen, because I'm sure you wonder, Blackbeard, well, who is this man on the screen? Now, remember, I talked about the Landgrave of Hesse-Kassel and how this family, Wilhelm IX, was responsible for providing the wealth for Meyer Amschel Rothschild to do accounting and finance work on his behalf and his family's behalf. All right. So let's read about this gentleman on the screen. Landgrave William of Hesse-Kassel, and this image can be found in a mausoleum, Rupenheim, Germany. All right. So if you want to know where Blackbeard, where did you get this image from? It's coming from a mausoleum, Rupenheim, Germany. All right. So you spell that Rupenheim, Germany. All right. So that's where this can be found. Rupenheim, Germany. All right. If we want to get some of the original images of the House of Hesse-Kassel and the Holy Roman Empire, or the swarthy nobility of Europa. This is the king of Landgrave, Germany, William of Hesse-Kassel. In Hebrew, it means castle. All right. So Mr. Lee Cummins is saying that, like, that last name Kessel means castle in Hebrew. All right. Because when you're going to find out through deeper research is that the Holy Roman Empire, or the swarthy nobility of Europa, that they actually claim that their ancestry goes back to the Judean kings of Jerusalem. And a lot of their symbols that they use on their coat of arms, a lot of those symbols go back to the Judaic kings, all right, of the Shemitic bloodline. So a lot of them were claiming to have Judaic ancestry. OK, and some of the original secret societies that they created, such as, I'll give you an example, the Order of the Dragon. OK, most of us know about Vlad the Impaler, or Dracul, which was a noble of Wallachia. He was a noble of Wallachia in Eastern Europe, which was an extension of the Holy Roman Empire. And they had a lot of beef with the Ottoman Empire during this time period. So what a lot of the kings, queens, aristocrats, and nobles of Eastern Europe, who were part of the Holy Roman Empire and they were under Christendom, they started to create secret societies to go against the Ottoman Empire. And one of them was called the Order of the Dragon. And this is what Vlad the Impaler was a part of. And it was started by, I want to say it was Sigismund of Luxembourg, who was actually the Holy Roman Emperor. Okay, so Vlad the Impaler, the Order of the Dragon, Sigismund of Luxembourg, who was an emperor, and a lot of these other members of the Holy Roman Empire, these were all swarthy people of Europa. All right, this is the same group of people that we're talking about. So let's go on. It says, this is the king of Landgrave, Germany, William of Hesse-Kassel. This is what the black Germans, British, Hessian soldiers looked like when they invaded the 13 colonies. This picture of a black, blue-eyed Hessian prince comes within 4 years of the end of the American Revolution. The Germans were still black 4 years after the Treaty of Paris was signed. If you take a look at the date in the top right-hand corner of the picture, you will see that this black, blue-eyed German didn't die until 1867. The Germans were still swarthy or black going into the 20th century. This secret has been dealt with in the Negro Question Part 4. So what we have right here is an image of Landgrave William of Hessen-Kassel, all right, the same dynastic family who helped the Rothschilds. Now, although this is a black and white image, but the color image, William of Hessen-Kassel is actually a dark-skinned man, a swarthy man with blue eyes. Now, when you look in Europa and some of the oldest, humans in Europa, they have discovered that they had swarthy skin or dark skin, and some of them had blue eyes. I'm going to repeat that. Some of the oldest humans of Europa were researched by archaeologists and found to have had swarthy or dark skinned, and some of them had blue eyes. You have certain tribes in so-called Africa, young children and elders, who have dark skin or swarthy skin complexions and blue eyes. So the genetic trait of having blue eyes did not start with the Caucasian people. All right. That genetic trait is also shared by the original swarthy people of Europa, going back to Cheddar Man and going back to other indigenous tribes of Europa who had dark skin. They were of a swarthy complexion and they had blue eyes. OK, so the Landgrave William of Hessen-Kassel descends from these original families of Europa. When they talk about Cheddar Man, the House of Grimaldi, and some of these other original melanated people of Europa, this is the bloodline that Hessen-Kassel comes from. So when I made that statement about how did the melanated people just lose all their power and control? Like, how did they just fall off of the face of the map when they were ruling for so long? They were ruling for hundreds and hundreds of years, for over 1,000 years. So how is it that the House of Hessen-Kassel in 1867 and 1787 that they were melanated with blue eyes, but today in 2025 that they're not? I just don't believe that. Now, yes, some of these families were amalgamated. And when I say amalgamated, what I mean is this. Remember, we talked about how they would raise the wild man and the wild woman up, and how they would sometimes marry into the swarthy family. Well, when they would produce an offspring, that child is going to be a mulatto or amalgamated. So they're going to take on the physical, ethnic features of both parents. But that doesn't mean that the entire bloodline now has been bleached out. The only way that would happen is if every person that was born would go and reproduce with a Caucasian person. And I just don't believe that that's the case. I believe some of them did. Some of the swarthy males and females may have reproduced with a Caucasian. So if you see a Caucasian person today and they have the last name Hesse or Kassel, and they seem like they ruling something in Germany today, that's because they have an ancestor that was Caucasian and they married into that family. And whoever was the offspring, they took on that name Hessen-Kassel. They inherited resources from that family, and they may have gone to procreate with a Caucasian person. And from that point forward, they may have chosen to only procreate Caucasian. But that does not wipe out the melanated, swarthy, blue-eyed family that they all originally came from. You just got another branch created off of that tree. So look at it more like a tree. You know how a tree has multiple branches. All of these branches have swarthy people on them. And the origin of each branch and the origin of the tree is of a swarthy persuasion. But you're going to have certain people create another branch where they procreate with a Caucasian person, and they may just procreate with only Caucasian people from that point forward. And now they have the last name Hesse-Kassel, and now they have the last name Rothschild, or now they have the last name Stewart. But the origin of that line did not come from Caucasian people. Okay. So remember, they would raise the Caucasians up. They would make them knights. They would free and accept them. They would free them from feudalism. They would free them from slavery, and they would accept them into their ranks. They would accept them into their families sometime. So that's where that term, a freed and accepted knight, or a freed and accepted mason, comes from, or a Freemason. There is no such thing as a swarthy person who's a Freemason. They may be a Mason, but you can't be a so-called black man and be a Freemason, because you were never freed. Your people freed the wild man and made him a knight. Or your people freed the Caucasian woman and she married into the aristocratic family. So that's why it looks kind of funny where you have so-called black men today and they join Masonry, not even really knowing what the origin of all of it was. The origin of it was, of course, fighting it really against other melanated families, and you got to consolidate. So they did it with the Order of the Dragon, and it goes all the way back to even the times of ancient Egypt, the times of ancient Sumer, the times of the ancient Maya and the ancient Olmec, even though they really weren't Caucasian people over here. But in other words, melanated secret societies have been around for thousands and thousands of years. They got melanated secret societies that we have never even heard of. So don't get confused when you see the modern day Sigma Pi Phi or the Boule of today. Yes, they may be using Greek paraphernalia. They may be using Greek mythology to consolidate themselves. And yes, you'd have this modern day talented 10th black bourgeoisie that's playing the archonic role in the Western civilization today. But the modern day Boule, they're playing the trick bag game. Because I think that certain high level members of the Boule that may be Shriners and Prince Hall Freemasons, I think you have high level members of the Boule that still are related to some of these swarthy aristocratic and noble families of Europa, but it just may not be publicly known. So the Boule may not answer to Caucasian secret societies like we once thought. What if the Boule is actually an extension of the Holy Roman Empire and some of these swarthy families of Europa who were ruling, but they playing the trick game by having the Boule in public? So it is perceived that the Caucasian is ruling. So it's perceived that the so-called Jewish man is ruling. So it's perceived that the so-called black Americans have to answer to the Caucasian secret societies. So it's perceived that the Divine Nine has to answer to the Skull and Bones in the Caucasian secret societies. What if that is all just a public game? What if really that the Boule members are actually higher up on the totem pole than the Skull and Bones, than your Caucasian Shriners? All right. Think about it. Think about what we're talking about. Do you really think that the melanated people of Europa, the swarthy nobility of the 13 colonies, even the copper-colored nobility of the tribal Americans, all right, do you really think that they just lost all their power? And I personally do not. I think that a lot of these people still rule behind closed doors. I think that they're playing a cat's paw game with the Caucasians, and they have them in power, and they're controlling things. But I think that they answer to the black nobility. They answer to the Venetian nobility. Like when they talk about the Venetians of Venice, all right, and the different cities of Venice, and they talk about the banking system, the original merchant families. Remember, we just learned that Rothschild got his start from the house of Hesse-Kassel, and a lot of his wealth was accrued from his profits that he gained by doing accounting and banking work for the black nobility. Why wouldn't that still be the case today? All right. So we just want to think about some things, and, we're going to end it with this. Landgrave William of Hesse-Kassel, 1787 to 1867. That is him on the screen right here in front of you. And he was a man of a swarthy complexion. He was dark skinned and he had blue eyes. All right. So we got to fix the mind control programming. And we got to, be very, very vigilant and aware that a lot of these images on the internet that they show us of Meyer Amschel Rothschild, or that they may show you of Nicholas Murtaugh, which was the great grandfather of George Washington, who was a French Huguenot, which were swarthy people of France who had, a Judaic culture. A lot of these images they show us are false, and it's part of the propaganda and it's part of the mind control. All right, because part of the Boule's mission is to get the average so-called Black American to think the narrative that we are slaves from Africa. Like, what if they made that up? What if the Caucasian didn't even make that up? What if it was some of these Boule members who made up this whole story about us being so-called slaves from Africa and being perpetually disenfranchised, when they clearly knew that our ancestors are actually the indigenous American Indian, and we also have family ties to the swarthy people of Europa who came to live on the 13 colonies. But what if they planned a whole race baiting game to keep that truth and to keep that knowledge away from the average so-called Black American? So it got us always pointing the finger and mad at the Caucasian person, where the Caucasian is just a cat's paw. He was never really the person in power. So just kind of, think about some of this stuff. And some of the, people we talked about and the Holy Roman Empire, you can research it and look into it for yourself. Because the Holy Roman Empire was, I think the first king was Charlemagne in the 800s AD. All right. The king of the Franks named Charlemagne in the 800s AD. And when you research Charlemagne's real image, he was a swarthy man. All right. So hopefully we learned something from this. Hit us up in the comment section. Stay tuned. Much more to come. Appreciate your patience. We out.